Okay, hello everyone. Let's go ahead and start this evening's class, our 20th class, counting them down. Let's go ahead and do our prayers. So we'll begin with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Do the short mandala offering prayer. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratnam Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in bodhicitta, first in English, and then 2 more times in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyan gipe sanam gi Dola Penchir Sangye Duparsho Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chanyen Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Duparsho. All right, let's go ahead and do a short meditation. And we usually just spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath in order to calm the mind somewhat. And then I'll come in and lead you in setting our motivation for tonight's class. So I'll ring the bell to begin this short meditation. So now let's set our motivation. And to do this tonight, I'd like to revisit an analogy that I used quite a few classes ago in talking about Buddha nature. Use the idea of a glass of water, that the nature of that water is clear when it's free of any sediment, any pollution. We can see the clarity, we can know it. But if there is dirt in the water, if it's mixed in, the water becomes opaque. We can't see the clarity that is underneath, that is residing together with that dirty water. And the dirt is not in the nature of the water. We know this because if we run that dirty water through filters, finer and finer filters that remove every bit of what pollutes the water, the clarity will be there once again in its complete form. Well, our minds have been like dirty water since the beginning of, things, which again, there is no beginning, beginningless time. We can't find a point at which this started. We can't find a point at which the mind started. So we've only known a mind with defilement, a mind that is polluted. But the nature of our minds is not in the nature of the defilements. Defilements are there adventitiously, just like the dirt is there, simply because we haven't created the causes to remove the dirt, to remove the pollution, and see the clarity of the water. So this is the state of our minds. And again, this is what we're examining in this section on these 9 similes, is that what obscures the mind, it's like the dirt, the nature of the mind, its clarity, its emptiness, is like the Buddha nature that we all possess, the ability to transform our minds completely. So when we set our motivation, we do it within that understanding that while admittedly we have a lot of dirt in our minds, we have a lot of pollution, a lot of defilements, a lot of obscurations, those don't define us and they don't limit us because they can all be removed. And we dedicate ourselves by setting this motivation of bodhicitta to accomplishing that task, to doing whatever we can, moment by moment, day by day, year by year, lifetime by lifetime, if necessary, to remove those obscurations and to make manifest our Buddha nature in its fully actualized state, the state of Buddhahood, which we do not for ourselves alone. We do it primarily and with great motivation and aspiration to be able to benefit others. This is bodhicitta, the wish to benefit these beings through actualizing our own potential completely, and hold that motivation for our time together here tonight. Hey, so again, we're working our way through this section on the 9 similes. It's a rather lengthy section of this text. And last week, again, we have in the simile, there are 2 components to it always. There's that which is obscuring and that which is obscured, something that is hiding our Buddha nature, our natural potential to be able to achieve enlightenment. And we've been working so far mainly with the meanings of that which obscures, the obscuration that is keeping us from knowing our Buddha nature. So we initially get these various similes, again, that we've been working with. I can put them on the screen real briefly just so we can kind of get back into the text. There are some of you who haven't been here for a little while, so I think it might be good just to do a short review of what we've covered so far. And this is in your materials in terms of the charts that go with this class of the Tathagata essence. And these are the, starting from the left-hand side, we see we have the actual simile set out, a Buddha in a withered lotus. So again, for that first one, what was obscuring was the withered lotus, and what was being obscured is a Buddha form, and so on. Again, we went through all of these in terms of at least beginning to identify more clearly what the analogy is, the simile is, but then also what the obscuring factor is. If you go over to the fourth column from the left, we see that there is where we have the meaning of that which is obscuring, the factors that are obscuring or hiding our Buddha nature. We went through these last week and talked about them and why they correspond to that. For example, the dormant attachment, the first one, is like the withered lotus, because a lotus is very beautiful and attractive when we first see it, right? Just like the mind of attachment that sees a beautiful form of a person that we're attracted to, for example, or whatever it is that we have some attraction towards. And it initially is very compelling and draws us in. But over time, it loses its luster because this is the nature of things. We imbue things with more qualities than they actually possess. And so they can't possibly live up to that. And so they eventually wither in terms of our attention. And we go on to something else. We find a new partner, or we find something else that preoccupies our attention, and so on. Whereas dormant hatred, the opposing mind of hatred that is towards those things that we find unpleasant, is like a swarm of bees, in that if you have a swarm of bees and the slightest thing comes in to annoy them and cause displeasure, then they become very dangerous. We talked about last week how it's not just dangerous to the person who's going to be stung, but to the bees themselves, right? Because the bees will lose their stinger and lose their life by virtue of that. That's, of course, pointing out the many faults of hatred and if we follow hatred and so on. And I'm not going to review all of these. This is just to get us back into the ballpark here of what we're going through. We made it up through the seventh one. Remember, the sixth and the seventh are referring to the objects of abandonment of the Hinayana path of seeing and then the Hinayana path of meditation. Again, these are not separate and distinct obscurations that don't overlap with any of the other ones in this column. They are repeated in terms of they're just a different way of approaching those obscurations. In this case, with regard to the path of seeing, we're talking about the afflictive obscurations because it's the Hinayana path of seeing. More specifically, we're talking about those that are acquired in this life, that are artificial, that we gain through following false tenets and teachings and so on. Then for the objects of abandonment of the Hinayana path of meditation, those are the remaining afflictive obscurations. Those are the innate ones, the ones that are inborn, that we carry from life to life. And so essentially what we have there is everything that would be abandoned by the Hinayanists, the hearers and solitary realizers, on their path to liberation, on their path to attaining arhatship. First, the acquired afflictive obscurations, and then the innate. So now we have yet to cover the two remaining ones that are the objects of abandonment of the seven impure grounds. Once we start talking about grounds, we generally are talking about the bodhisattvas, even though you could say there are hearer grounds and so on. Usually the term grounds or bhumi in Sanskrit are referring to the bodhisattva bhumis, the bodhisattva grounds. Remember that we had that chart that we went through. Let me put it up on the screen real briefly, where we have the bodhisattva path. This is the Mahayana path. And we go through all of the various grounds, the first ground beginning with the path of seeing. Once we enter into the second ground, then we're on the path of meditation. So when we talk about the first seven, we are talking about up through this point that's got the demarcation of H at the bottom there. H is where we technically have gotten rid of all of the afflictive obscurations. In other words, the bodhisattva has the same level of freedom from the obscurations that the arhats do. But then the bodhisattva goes on the pure grounds, the three pure grounds, 8th, 9th, and 10th, to abandon the knowledge obscurations. Recall that these are in the box down here below, the cognitive obscurations down at the bottom and the right there. Imprints of the conception of inherent existence, and all factors of mistaken dualistic appearance that arise due to its force. So again, this is the main one the bodhisattvas are trying to remove, because this is what actually is an obscuration to omniscience, buddhahood, enlightenment. But they still have to remove the afflictive obscurations first, because they have to purify their own minds of all the defilements and then go on to remove these subtler defilements that exist on the pure grounds, that are going to be removed on the pure grounds. They exist throughout this, but they will be the antidotes to them will be generated in the paths, the meditative equipoise that occurs as you move through these pure grounds. So this is where we're at in terms of the text. Is we're going to go to this last little part. Oops. That's it. Okay, yeah, right, because we have all these verses lumped together. We're going to deal with the last two verses that were in this huge section. We're on page 194 of the commentary. At the bottom of 194 is the first of the two verses. This is the one that pertains to the first that we're going to talk about, which is the eighth simile. And there we're talking about the obscuring factor of a womb that is covering the universal monarch, the baby that is going to be born from that womb, that will become this amazing being. It's like the height of a mundane experience in some regard in terms of samsara, is you're born as a universal monarch that can bring peace and well-being to many parts of the world and so on. This is what is taught. Again, we don't have the karma to have a universal monarch like this in our world right now. So let's look at that verse. Again, I can't get it to be further up on the screen because of this kind of jumping to the next page on my PDF file. It says the defilements in relation to the 7 impure grounds can be compared to the defilement of the covering of the womb of this woman who is pregnant with the universal monarch. Being freed from the covering of the womb is similar to the fully ripened non-conceptual exalted wisdom. Again, to being able to have this culmination on the path that will allow you to have complete freedom from all the obscurations that are abandoned on the impure grounds. Now, again, it says non-conceptual exalted wisdom, and we have a non-conceptual exalted wisdom experienced by bodhisattvas and whenever they're in meditative equipoise. You don't have the full experience of all non-conceptual exalted wisdom until you get to buddhahood, because you still will come out of those meditative equipoise sessions and have conceptuality and the world around you reappearing and what have you. Let's go to the next page, then to the top of page 195, where we have the final verse in this section that pertains to the 9th simile, and then we'll go through the commentary that pertains to these two from Gyaltsab. So verse 143 says, the defilements connected to the 3 pure grounds are likened to the covering of a clay mold. So you have a clay mold that is surrounding a gold statue of a Buddha. And of course, the clay is what it was sort of set in, but it's very slight. It's not like a rock mold or something, or a metal mold that's very dense. It's actually quite slight. We're going to see this come into play when we look at the commentary for this. Through the vajra-like samadhi of the mighty one, they are overcome. This vajra-like samadhi, again, we talked about a little bit last week. This is the point at the very end of the continuum of a sentient being before they become a Buddha. So I'll show it on the chart in a moment. But this vajra-like samadhi is called that because you generate this indestructible wisdom at that point that will finalize your removal of everything that is to be abandoned by the Mahayana path. And again, this term vajra-like samadhi is also used on occasion for the hearers and solitary realizers when they get to the end of their Hinayana path before they become an arhat. But of course, they have the work yet to do on the Mahayana path, so they haven't really accomplished what a bodhisattva is accomplishing when they generate that mind. Let me share with you, I did find something in my reading I did for this section that, of course, I hadn't done previously because it wasn't part of what I was preparing for in some of the previous classes. But this is from Geshe Jampel Gyaltsen. Again, his commentary I've cited on occasion. It's really quite nice. I didn't have this commentary the first time that I taught this, so I'm getting a lot more information from him that I didn't have, and a lot of questions I had previously are being answered. But he more or less asserts the same thing that I've been saying around this vajra-like samadhi. He says the vajra-like samadhi is the last moment of the path of meditation and is compared to a vajra, or dorje is a Tibetan term. You have, again, it's kind of a diamond implement. It's meant to be kind of indestructible. In being very strong and indestructible, he says, if one is a hearer or a solitary realizer, one will destroy the last obstruction at the last moment of the path of meditation within their vajra-like samadhi. And the next moment, one will achieve liberation and become an arhat. So we can use that term to refer again to the end of the fourth path, the path of meditation for the hearers in solitary realizers. Again, they have their 5 paths, but they're not the Mahayana path, they're the Hinayana path. After they remove that, they enter into their path of no more learning, which is arhatship. And unless they're beckoned into the Mahayana path before they exit from that body, they will take a mental body and abide in a solitary peace until they are beckoned into the Mahayana path by a Buddha to say, again, you haven't done all the work, you need to complete the Mahayana path. But again, this vajra-like samadhi is a similar strength in terms of being able to remove the subtlest obscurations for them, which are the subtlest afflictive obscurations that are, again, innate. For a bodhisattva, Geshe Japa Gyaltsen says, the next moment after the vajra-like samadhi that they generate at the path of meditation is buddhahood. The vajra-like samadhi has strong power, due to which this final obstruction is eliminated. Therefore, it is called vajra-like samadhi. In entity, the vajra-like samadhi is an uninterrupted path. So when we go back to that chart, again, we've talked about this previously, that we have the uninterrupted path and then the path of release or the liberated path. So when we look at this, we see again that herringbone that is occurring here. We're talking about at the tail end of the chart here, when we get to the 10th ground. At the end of the continuum of the sentient being, before they become a Buddha, there is an uninterrupted path. There's usually a path of release that is indicated to go into the next ground, but the next ground isn't a ground per se, it's the Buddhahood, it's the path of no more learning. So the path of release occurs right after. So the vajra-like samadhi, again, is this diagonal first part of the herringbone there that is the uninterrupted path at the end of the continuum of a sentient being for bodhisattvas. Again, for the Hinayanas, it would not be the end of the continuum of a sentient being, it would be the end of their Hinayana path and the arrival at the path of no more learning there, which once again is arhatship. But I thought I would share that with you because it just, again, reasserts what I was saying, but maybe gives just a little bit more information and reaffirms that this is actually something that the Hinayanas also do cultivate. Is everybody hearing me okay? It sounds like it was maybe going in and out a little bit. Keep some batteries ready, maybe, just in case. All right, let's go back to the text then, and talk about the commentary on these 2 verses. So, that was it right there, the 4th part. Again, we have kind of 4 parts to this. We had that pertaining to the ordinary beings, which was the first 4 similes, that which pertains to Hinayana arhats, which is the 5th simile, and then the Hinayana learners, which is the 5th or 6th and 7th similes. The 8th and 9th pertain to the bodhisattva aryas, the superior bodhisattvas. Okay, so let's look at what's said there in the middle of the screen. The 4th part deals with the similes of the obscurations on the impure and pure levels. The defilements found on the 7 impure levels are likened to the defilement of the covering of the womb because they hide what should be known. So again, the idea here is that this woman who is impoverished and unfortunate, she doesn't know that she has this unbelievable savior in her womb that will free her from all of her problems and difficulties. It should be known. She should know that she has this. So in a way, the womb is covering something that we should know, that we should have that knowledge of. That's the way that the analogy or the simile is tied to these obscurations of the impure level. Gyaltsab Je continues, he says, the non-conceptual exalted wisdom of the 8th level is likened to being freed from the covering of the womb and is a ripening arising effortlessly from previous karma. Because again, the bodhisattva at that point has abandoned all the afflictive obscurations. So they no longer have any of these conceptual minds that are clinging to inherent existence or their seeds. They've removed all of that. They have nothing to fear in terms of the appearances of samsara and enticing them into the afflictions, but they still have something to fear in terms of those false appearances themselves. And that is what they will abandon on the 3 pure grounds: the false appearances of inherent existence and the imprints of ignorance that give rise to them. So then it says, similarly, defilements connected with the 3 pure levels on which all effort is almost neutralized. Again, they don't require great amounts of effort, but they do require a requisite measure of merit, are like the thin covering of the clay mold. I mentioned this earlier. And it's not some sort of metal or some other substance that would be really dense. It's a clay mold that can easily be chipped away, which will be destroyed by the mighty vajra-like concentration. Again, they make these references as if everything that you will abandon on the three pure grounds is abandoned on that vajra-like samadhi. That's actually not, again, how it goes. You do abandon the coarser level, then the middling level, and then finally the subtler level on each of the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds. So just know that this isn't, it's saying that you have the final removal when you have the vajra-like samadhi, just like you have the final removal of all the afflictive obscurations when you have this non-conceptual wisdom at the end of that 7th ground that propels you into the 8th ground. That causes you then to have the state of arhatship essentially for the bodhisattva. But again, in the Hinayana path, it would mean that they've achieved arhatship themselves. They are in their path of no more learning, and they can sort of check out of samsara and abide in peace until they have to do that deeper work. So oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go back there. I did want to share with you I didn't open this. Oh, shoot, it's going to take me just a second to open this. Just have to pull up that and go right to where I need to be. Right there, and get the slideshow going. Okay, so let me go back to Zoom and pull that up, and then we can do a few slides. Again, this is just the last few slides that were in last week's that pertain to what Geshe Loden says about these last two. He says for the 8th one, the womb, the defilements of the 7 impure grounds are similar to the impurities of the womb. The non-conceptual wisdom of the 8th ground bodhisattva, having depended on the 7th ground wisdom, in other words, the uninterrupted path of the 7th ground, frees one from the defilements of the first 7 grounds. So again, that's like saying that at the path of release, when you enter into the 8th ground, you're still having that wisdom, but essentially this is a non-conceptual mind that is together with the cessation of all of the afflictive obscurations at this point. All of the defilements of the first 7 grounds have been removed because you finally removed the list ground. Okay. Then it is shown to be similar to a baby being born, a baby with the potential to become a universal king. The baby is thus released from its previous confinement within the mother's womb. So again, because the womb is removed, the baby can be revealed. The baby can be free of all of that and kind of be made fully manifest. Being released from the impurities of the womb is likened to attaining the non-conceptual wisdom of the 8th ground, bodhisattva, which is released from the constriction of the obstructions of the first 7 grounds. So Geshe Loden goes a little further in using the analogy of the womb to talk about the impurities of the womb, to also talk about the constriction of the obstructions. You know, we're probably lucky we don't remember what it was like in the womb when we were, fetuses, having to deal with the impure substances there, having to deal with the constriction, the movements our mothers made that were uncomfortable for us, all of those sorts of things. So again, that's everything we've dealt with in samsara that are our grosser forms of suffering. The subtler ways that we are still caught up in samsara, or caught up in samsaric appearances, at least false appearances, are yet to be removed. But we sort of are free from the constriction and the impurity of samsara at that point. We're definitely free of it at that point, although the bodhisattvas continue to abide in samsara, to complete the pure grounds, and to become a Buddha that then can manifest in samsara for the benefit of others. So, nope, that's where I was. Number 9, the clay mold, which is again corresponding to the objects of abandonment of the 3 pure grounds. Similarly, the defilements of the 3 pure grounds are the objects to be eliminated by the vajra-like concentration or samadhi of the great being, the bodhisattva. This great being refers to a bodhisattva nearing the end of the continuum of a sentient being. Remember, it's not that the being ceases to exist at that point. You cease to be called a sentient being, which is a label that is given to all beings who are not Buddhas. If you divide all beings into 2, it would be Buddhas and sentient beings. Sentient beings are anybody who has not yet attained Buddhahood. Buddhas are, of course, those beings who have. When the defilements of the three pure grounds are abandoned, the three bodies of a Buddha, these three kayas, we've talked about these previously, the truth body, which here is primarily referring to the nature truth body, though the Dharmakaya, the wisdom Dharmakaya, the wisdom truth body would also be by default included. The enjoyment body and the emanation body are attained. And sometimes it's called the complete enjoyment body. But the idea is that you have those two form bodies, the enjoyment body and the emanation bodies. These are the rupakaya of a Buddha that are able to manifest so sentient beings can benefit from them. So this is at the tail end of the continuum of that sentient being when they cross over into that path of release and become a Buddha on the path of no more learning. They then are immediately, that second, they have all four bodies of a Buddha: the nature truth body, the wisdom truth body that represent the Dharmakaya, the truth body, and then the two form bodies, the enjoyment body and the emanation bodies. Okay, that's good. Let's stop there. I may have skipped one. I felt like I skipped a slide in there somewhere, but maybe I didn't. I don't know. Anyway, let's go back to our text. If I did, you can catch up with it with the copies of the slides. Now we're entering into the summary where we're just going to kind of, wrap this whole section up of that which is the obscuring factor, the obscuration. So it says, thus the 9 defilements, attachment and so on, again, with dormant attachment, dormant hatred, dormant ignorance, manifestations of the three, all those that we've been through, all the way through what we just talked about, the objects of abandonment on the 3 pure levels. These correspond to the similes of the lotus and so forth, just like I had in that chart again, that we see that all of these that are in this column in the meaning of the obscured, of the obscuring, are correlated with what's in the column of the obscuring. So there's again a correspondence and a meaning. And as we pointed out, they do have some reason why they're connected to those. It's not just a random choice of, oh, we're going to put dormant hatred with the swarm of bees. No, there's a reason. So that's part of, again, studying this section, is to make sure that we can be clear about why those correspondences are made. Gyaltsab says, as explained previously, the 9 defilements, desire and so forth, are likened to the lotus and so on. It is acceptable to explain these 2 lines as the link to the following section, but they are explained here as a summary of the previous section, right? Because you could add them to the next part and say it's a link getting you into the next section where we're going to talk about that which is obscured, the part of the simile that is the objects that are being hidden by something else, right? But you could, again, as Gyaltsab does here, put it as a summary section for what we've just covered. So now we're going to look at the 4th section of this thing that, again, had 4 main parts to it. I won't go back to the page that corresponded to this or where this all started, but we now look at the correspondence in the similes of the obscured basic element, the Buddha nature that is not evident to us, that is being obscured by some factor that is in our minds. And that's what all 9 of those obscuring or obscurations we're referring to, is things within our own minds that keep us from knowing our Buddha nature. So let's look at the next verse. Again, this is the other 2 lines of verse 144. Because the basic element can be subsumed into 3 natures, it corresponds to a Buddha and so on. So remember the 3 natures. Does everyone remember the 3 natures? Maybe I'll do a little quiz here. I don't quiz people very often. What are the 3 natures of the Buddha lineage or the Buddha nature? This goes back to the first presentation of the 10 presentations. Anyone remember? Okay, the first one is called the Dharmakaya. There it's primarily referring to the wisdom Dharmakaya, which again is the ability for eventually to have this power of being the Buddha essence that manifests for the sake of others, that is able to lead them on the path by teaching them the Dharma. But it refers to the way also in which we and all sentient beings are pervaded by that. The wisdom Dharmakaya exists and manifests in a variety of ways to help sentient beings. We are all subject to the influence of the Buddhas in that manner. So the Dharmakaya is pointing to, in some regard, an external aspect that is the influence of these beings on us. And there's no sentient being that is outside of the scope of concern of Buddhas, right? Because they will do whatever is necessary to benefit all sentient beings. They have a compassion that extends to all of them and so on. So the first kind of element of it is mainly, again, the wisdom truth body, the fully enlightened mind of a Buddha that is imbued with the perfect wisdom of the ultimate truth, emptiness, but also is imbued with the understanding of conventionalities so that it can therefore do whatever is necessary to benefit sentient beings. What is the second of these three natures? Anyone? I'll need to study more. No, I'm just joking with you. Suchness. Suchness. Remember, we talked about suchness being undifferentiable. The suchness of a Buddha's mind is the same as the suchness of your minds. Suchness is another term for emptiness. The emptiness, the suchness, the thusness, the selflessness, the emptiness of your mind and a Buddha's mind are no different. You have the same suchness, you have the same condition by having a mind that is empty of inherent existence that exists in the Buddha's mind. And this is actually what allows for the transformation of the mind to occur. It's not a cause of enlightenment in a strict sense because it's not a produced phenomenon. It's an emptiness, a suchness, a negation. So therefore, it can't be a cause, but it is a condition, if you will, or a state that acts as a means for the attainment of Buddhahood. That if everything is empty of inherent existence, therefore, things can change and transform. Therefore, the mind can be free of all the defilements. So the second element in terms of a nature of the Buddha nature is suchness. The last, of course, is kind of pointing to lineage itself, which is essentially in that case primarily referring to the naturally abiding lineage. Well, I'm sorry, the developmental lineage, because a naturally abiding lineage is already covered kind of in the second one. We have suchness with defilement right now, which is the naturally abiding lineage. When you get to the suchness of a Buddha, it's suchness without defilement, but it's the same suchness, the same emptiness. So the third one is primarily the fact that we have developmental lineage, which of course implies we also have naturally abiding lineage, that we do have the emptiness of the mind that allows for the mind to develop. So we have these three. The Dharmakaya, which is mainly the wisdom truth body of the Buddha that acts as a guiding influence for other beings that we will actualize at some point to be able to join the ranks of those Buddhas and do the same work. Then we have the suchness or emptiness of our minds. It's undifferentiable from the suchness or emptiness of the minds of the Buddhas. And then we have the developmental lineage, which is there because of the naturally abiding lineage, which allows us to be influenced by those teachings and change our minds and move in the direction of Buddhahood and eventually attain that state. So these are the three categories that we're going to look at in terms of identifying that which is obscured, that element of the simile, because again, it's generally referring to Buddha nature. Buddha nature has all three of those involved in its nature. When we got to that part of the 10 presentations, I'll put that on the chart real quick, or that chart on here real quick. I have to back up a bit, go all the way back to the first of the 10 presentations. Whoops, there it is. So if we look at the first of the 10 presentations, it was nature. The subdivisions were Dharmakaya, suchness, and lineage. Again, you can go back and revisit your chart to kind of take a look at all of that. But that's kind of pointing to what we're going to be looking at in this section, is taking these 9 and parsing them up into these 3, correlating them to some degree, and then moreover, correlating them to particular aspects of those 3. Okay. So the next thing says here, because the basic element can be summarized by the threefold nature, such as the perfect Buddha body emanates. Remember, that's the first one, the Dharmakaya. The perfect Buddha body emanates. It's able to guide sentient beings through having the influencing activities that it does and pervading all sentient beings by virtue of that. That's the first of the 3. It has been then likened to the form of a Buddha and so forth. That's the first of the 9 similes in terms of that which is obscured. All right. So then we get kind of a little commentary that starts with the Sangha's, a line from a Sangha's text that I don't need to repeat there. And then when we get into the specific explanation of that whole section. It says that there's a general explanation of the similes, and then we're going to look at the extensive explanation of the correspondence in a similar manner to what we did for that which obscures. So it's maybe not quite as clearly laid out in terms of kind of combine some of these things a little bit more. So the general explanation of the similes starts with this, begins with the question, what is the threefold nature of the basic element, taught as the Tathagata essence possessed by all sentient beings? The answer is what follows in this verse, which again is corresponding to what we saw back when we looked at nature in terms of the first of the 10 presentations. Its nature is the Dharmakaya, suchness, and the lineage, those threefold factors. These should be known by way of 3 of the similes in terms of what is obscured, 1 of the similes in terms of what is obscured, and then the remaining 5 in terms of the similes. So it's 3, 1, and 5 is how they're going to be parsed up into these 3. The threefold nature of this basic element, Gyaltsab says, which was taught as being the reason why it pervades all sentient beings, comprises the Dharmakaya, suchness, and lineage. And these 3 are illustrated respectively by 3, 1, and 5 similes. So pretty straightforward. I don't need to give any commentary on that. Let's finish off this section and get to the correspondences, and then I'll share a little bit of what Geshe Loden says on this section. So if we start off with the first 3, we get the statue of the form of the Buddha, the honey, and the kernel of the grain, right? The grain that is inside the husk, are similes illustrating that the basic element is pervaded by the enlightened activities of the Dharmakaya, and therefore it possesses the nature of the Dharmakaya. Okay? Then meaning that sentient beings have the potential to be engaged by the enlightened activities of the Dharmakaya. I just talked about that. But again, when we talk about that first element of nature, it means that the Dharmakaya, the wisdom truth body of the Buddhas, pervades all beings. It manifests for all beings exactly according to their karma. Again, not all beings are able to experience it to the degree that Lama Tsongkhapa experienced it, for example, and appearing in the form of Manjushri and teaching him and so on. Most sentient beings have a lot of obstacles, obscurations to receiving the teachings, the guiding influence of the Dharmakaya. But nonetheless, they're not outside the purview of those enlightened beings in that wisdom truth body. The one simile of the gold, this was the 4th simile, illustrates that it has the nature of suchness, meaning that the Tathagata essence is undifferentiated from the Dharmakaya in its aspect of natural purity. Right? Remember, we talk about the Dharmakaya, the nature truth body. Again, Dharmakaya gets used sometimes to refer to the nature truth body, sometimes the wisdom truth body. In this case, we're talking about the nature truth body. It has, as we saw last week, again, reiterating this, 2 elements of purity. The natural purity, which is its emptiness of inherent existence, and then the purity of the adventitious defilements, which is, again, what we are able to achieve through practicing the path, through using our developmental lineage as a support for actualizing Buddhahood in our minds. So the natural purity is the same as what sentient beings have in terms of their emptiness, the emptiness of their minds, the suchness of their minds, all right? So that's the idea behind that 4th analogy, and we're going to get into it in greater detail as we go through this section. Then it says 5 similes, namely the treasure, that's the 5th one, tree, precious tree, again, is referring to the seed that becomes a sprout, that becomes a tree, shedding the husk, or not quite husk, but the peeling that is around the fruit that is kind of left behind as it develops into a tree. The precious statue, the universal emperor that we just talked about, and then the statue of the Buddha, which is in the 9th of these similes. And they illustrate that the Tathagata essence has the nature of the lineage that develops into the 3 bodies of the Buddha. Again, so we are primarily talking about developmental lineage when we talk about lineage there, but it would include the naturally abiding lineage, even though, again, that's kind of already discussed to some degree in that second aspect of nature, right? Okay, so let's just take it up a little bit here, and then we'll go to the slides. And I'm sharing with you almost all that Geshe Loden had, because I think it's worth hearing his words and sharing these. And I hope people don't mind that I do that. I know it's sometimes hard just to listen to me read something, but Geshe Loden says, we have shown above the manner in which the examples of lotus and so on resemble 9 types of defilements. Now, what is the object obscured by these 9 types of defilements, such as dormant attachment and so forth? It is the Tathagata essence within the continuum of the beings that is the object obscured. And we just generally say that. When we started with this in a very kind of general way, talking about the 9 similes, it was always, well, the Buddha nature, the natural lineage is there. That is what we mean. The Tathagata essence, when we usually refer to it, is that is what's being obscured. But again, there are other elements to it because it has those 3 natures that we just discussed. So he says the reason for illustrating the Buddha potential with 9 examples, though, is to show that the Buddha nature is included within the 3 natures. It is thus likened to the Buddha statue or form body and so forth. I'm pointing out here that the 3 natures were also set out in the first of the 10 presentations, of course, that we just looked at, but they're also referenced in verse 127. 127, if you memorize any verse from this whole text, is probably a good one to memorize. Because the activities of the Dharmakaya are pervasive, because suchness is undifferentiable, and because of having the lineage, all sentient beings always have the Buddha essence. And just to remember those 3 as this is the underpinning for all of this. This is why we can speak to the 2 main things we've been talking about, that there's the clear light nature of the mind and that the stains are adventitious. The first was what was being emphasized in the 10 presentations. The second is what's being emphasized in these 9 similes. All right. So again, I would encourage you to memorize that verse if you can. The 3 natures are illustrated by the examples as follows. The truth body, or the Dharmakaya, is illustrated by the first 3 examples. The Buddha statue is what he uses here. Now, again, I mentioned previously that in the beginning, we were calling it a Buddha form, the actual form of a Tathagata, the form of a Buddha, meaning like a physical form of that being, not just a statue. But of course, Buddhas can appear as statues too. It's not to say that a statue couldn't be an actual Buddha form. But again, this is the first of the 9 obscured objects, the honey and the grain. Those are the first 3 that pertain to, again, the Dharmakaya, the wisdom truth body of the Buddha. B, suchness, is illustrated by the 4th example, the gold. C, Buddha potential, is illustrated by the remaining 5 examples, the treasure, the sprout, or the tree, again, wherever you want to demarcate it, the precious statue, the baby with the potential to be a universal king, and the statue made from molten gold, again, the 5th through the 9th. The examples relevant to each of the 3 natures are explained below, and this is where we're going to go when we come back, when we go first to Gyaltsab Je's wonderful commentary, and I comment on that, and then we'll get Geshe Loden's kind of take on it. Okay, so now we're in the correspondence section, right? Correspondence of the similes. First, the correspondence to the Dharmakaya, and then the correspondence to the suchness, and then to the lineage, the 3 aspects or natures, characteristics, whatever you want to call them, with regard to Buddha nature or Buddha essence. So Maitreya's verse 146 sets out the first one. It's setting out how these are delineated within it first. There's a kind of an introduction to them, if you will. Maitreya does this on occasion where he kind of introduces them and then he'll talk about them individually. So he says the Dharmakaya is to be known at first as twofold. We have 3 analogies or similes that relate to it, but we're first going to divide Dharmakaya into 2. The first is the utterly undefiled Dharmadhatu, which means the wisdom, truth, mind of a Buddha. That is something that cannot be known, right? We cannot know the mind of a Buddha. The mind of a Buddha is purely the personal experience of that Buddha, and any other Buddhas have access to knowing it because they know all phenomena. But the sphere of reality, the Dharmadhatu, that is the wisdom mind of a Buddha, is the first aspect of the Dharmakaya, which is the concordant cause. It's from which the second aspect of the Dharmakaya, which is the Dharmakaya of teaching, which is the means by which the Buddhas do all of the work they do. By way of first, the profound, which are the definitive sutras, and then the various, the varied, the vast is sometimes what it's called, the profound and the vast. These are all the interpretable sutras that teach conventional truths. So when we talk about, again, the Dharmakaya, we can say it has the wisdom mind of the Buddha, and then the way in which that wisdom mind manifests to benefit others through teaching the Dharma. Through teaching the Dharma in terms of the ultimate truth and teaching the Dharma in terms of conventional truth. Thereby, we get three aspects: the wisdom, truth, body, and then the two ways that the teachings are manifesting in terms of definitive sutras and interpretable sutras, or what are sometimes called provisional sutras, which is essentially everything else the Buddha taught other than emptiness. So, Gyaltsab says, the reason it is taught that all sentient beings are pervaded by the basic element of the Tathagata is the following. The Dharmakaya first should be known as having two aspects. The first of these two aspects is the exalted wisdom Dharmakaya of realization, which is the direct realization of the Dharma Dhatu, naturally pure, devoid of all adventitious defilement, and thereby totally undefiled. Okay. The second is the Dharmakaya of the teachings. And this is even how we often talk about dividing the Dharma jewel, right? Is it's divided into realizational and scriptural, the teachings. So essentially, when we have the realizational Dharma at its fullest apex, it's a Buddha jewel, but it's embodied also within the Dharma jewel, and it also manifests and forms as the Sangha jewel. But that is either going to be a scriptural Dharma jewel or a realizational. That's the realizational. The scriptural is the way in which Buddhas then teach the Dharma to others so they can attain the same state. So the second is the Dharmakaya of the teachings, the scriptures, and it refers to teachings as concordant results of the direct realization of the suchness within the mind of the Buddha. Right? Those teachings act as a concordant cause to help sentient beings such as Buddha Shakyamuni, when he was on the Bodhisattva path, to discern emptiness, to be able to actualize the wisdom, truth, body, the realization of the Dharma fully. And it's the boat that takes us to the other shore. We use these different analogies. So these scriptures or teachings comprise, first, the profound teachings, referring to the definitive sutras, expressing the ultimate truth. Remember, from the point of view of Prasangika Madhyamaka, how you define what is definitive is teachings that teach emptiness of inherent existence. The second wheel turning of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras are the definitive sutras, and anytime in any sutra that emptiness is discussed in terms of the lack of inherent existence, that is a definitive sutra or definitive teaching. And teachings on the various conventional truths, Gyaltsab says, of the persons, aggregates, and so forth, which are taught using a variety of terminology by the interpretable sutras. So that's the other element. Because the Buddha teaches both things that are provisional, that need to be interpreted because they aren't the final word of the Buddha, and the definitive sutras that help us to get to the final taste of emptiness. Okay, so now we get commentary on that sort of introduction. The Dharmakaya of the Buddhas should be known as having two aspects: the Dharmakaya of the teachings and the Dharmakaya of realization. The totally pure Dharma Dhatu is the object within the scope of the non-conceptual exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise. Mention of both object and scope refers to the particular feature of this constant meditative equipoise. Remember, a Buddha is in meditative equipoise on emptiness forever. They never move from that. They never are stirred from that, because that is the culmination of the path for them, to be in meditative equipoise on emptiness for eternity. And it says this aspect is from the point of view of dharmas individually realized in the meditative equipoise of the Tathagatas. Although this is talking about the objects realized, it is referring to the Dharmakaya of realization that realizes these objects. Right? So we're not talking about the Dharma Dhatu as the object. We're talking about the mind that realizes the Dharma Dhatu, that is in meditative equipoise at all times with the Dharma Dhatu, on the Dharma Dhatu, the sphere of reality. says this sentence from the commentary is an explanation of the previous sentence. I'm not sure exactly how to interpret that. I think there was something from Geshe Jumpel Gyaltsen saying essentially that we're talking about how we are commenting on what was previously said about the first aspect of this, the Dharmakaya of realization, and how it is realizing Dharma Dhatu all the time, the totally pure Dharma Dhatu. It's the object within the scope of that wisdom. It is what is being realized by the Buddha continually. Then we have focusing on the teachings of the Buddha and meditating on their meanings leads to the attainment of the Dharmakaya. Again, it's concordant causes. Through the teachings of the Buddha, we are then creating the causes for the realizational Dharmakaya, the wisdom truth body of a Buddha. Therefore, the teachings as the cause of the attainment of the Dharmakaya are the concordant results of the realization of the totally pure Dharma Dhatu. But we can also say they are the concordant causes. I mean, it's kind of interesting because, again, you have them being the causes for the Buddha that you will become, but they are also the results that you then have when you are that, when you are the wisdom truth body, when that is what you are manifesting as, because you've removed all the adventitious defilements. That was what I explained earlier when I talked about that first aspect or that first nature, right? And we talk about Dharmakaya, we can see it in terms of the Dharmakaya that is what we are going to realize, what we are going to actualize. And within that Dharmakaya, then the main way that we guide beings is through the teachings on the definitive meaning of ultimate truth, emptiness, and the teachings on the provisional meaning of the conventional reality that needs to be taught as well. That is how we will manifest. But we need that as a concordant cause to attain that. So that's why we're also talking about the Dharmakaya in terms of its influence on us. The wisdom mind of a Buddha that then manifests in terms of giving us both the provisional and interpretable sutras so that we can actualize that same state. All right? Yes, Stephen. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. I don't know. I'd have to analyze that to see kind of what would fit in there. I'm not even sure what the Tibetan word that's being translated as concordant here. Concordant, in my just off the cuff understanding, is something that again has a nature that is similar. So like that's why I think we get this idea that there's something concordant with the teachings that is the cause that created that Buddha, that is the cause that then creates us as a Buddha. That is part of the manifest result of the Buddhahood of the Buddha who's teaching us, but is also part of the causes that we then are able to use to actualize our own Dharmakaya. So there's kind of a concordance, sort of something that will fit through all of that. Mm, I would think that that's probably a fair assessment, but I don't know if that's necessarily behind the meaning of concordant. I don't know. It's so interesting how we do use a lot of English language and we take for granted kind of what the meanings of some of these things are. But concordant has maybe slightly different meanings sometimes. And again, I don't know the Tibetan term that's being translated as that. So I'm not sure, not that I know that much Tibetan, but I could at least look it up and get some better idea of the shades of meaning that might be coming in with that. Did anyone want to share anything else and any observations on that? I don't know. Shayla, were you going to say something? Yes, please.
What was the
Oh,
questions? Or what were the questions?
The question is, what is the meaning of calling it a concordant cause and a concordant result? And I think the idea is that it has a concordance, an agreement that is kind of there throughout that, so that again, the teachings that we are receiving through the Dharmakaya of others, the Buddhas that are manifesting in ways to benefit us, have a concordance with what we then actualize and are able to disseminate to others. But there's kind of this thread following through it. I don't know. Oh, okay. Okay. So that there are questions. Oh, we didn't have the question. That's why. I'm sorry. Yeah, you probably couldn't hear it because my microphone wasn't picking it up. We forgot that here. We'll do better the next time. Any other questions on this or comments? Lou, did? You can keep it, Stephen. Okay, let's go back to our text and finish off this section. I think, or have we finished it? Yeah, we have finished it. That's the actual, no, we haven't. I'm sorry. Okay, so it says, these are expressed, this is the fourth line down from the top, these are expressed as speech to other sentient beings as disciples of the three lineages. Again, the three lineages are the here, solitary realizer, and bodhisattva lineages, and to ordinary beings who are temporarily of uncertain lineage, right? So you have those who have kind of moving in the direction of here, solitary realizer, or bodhisattva, and then you have those who are uncertain. This aspect is the Dharmakaya of the teachings. These teachings also have two aspects, the subtle and the vast, or the profound and the vast, as it's often referred to. 12 branches of teaching referred to in the commentary are spoken of as the 9 branches of teaching in some sutras, but this is just an abridgment. I'm not going to go into the 12 and the 9. They often talk about the 12 sort of branches, and they can condense those into the 3 baskets, the Tripitaka, which are often referred to as the 3 morality, which is the Vinaya, the Sutra basket, which are the discourses on concentration, and then the Abhidharma, which are the basket of teachings on wisdom. So again, you have different ways of delineating, and you can divide those again into 12 with different aspects, and then the 9 consolidates some of the 12 into other ones. So again, this is just an abridgment to put them all into this, 2 main categories of the subtle and the vast. You can parse up the Buddhist teachings many ways. Recall many of you have heard that whole statement that there's 84,000 baskets of teachings, right? So you can even go to a further number beyond the 9 and the 12, but I couldn't even begin to approach what that number resembles or what it signifies in terms of the teachings of the Buddha. Let's go to what Geshe Loden says in introducing this and kind of correlating it with verse 146 that we just went through. Whoops, I think I may have gone up a slide, did I? No, did I? Yeah, I went up 2 slides. No, that's 145. Okay, I already got that. I'm sorry. I hit something on my screen and I thought I had gone down a slide. So A, the truth body, the Dharmakaya, this is the first of the 3 natures. In this particular context is described in 2 parts. The first is the wisdom truth body, which in this instance is the perfect, immaculate wisdom directly perceiving the ultimate nature of the mind. Again, we can't say that the wisdom truth body doesn't also include the knowledge of conventional truth. But in this case, we're talking about it as primarily being the manifestation of that meditative equipoise on emptiness into the continual wisdom realizing emptiness that a Buddha has at all times, again, through eternity. The second itself has 2 parts, both of which arise due to the wisdom truth body. The first is the definitive sutras, which primarily and explicitly explain profound emptiness. The second is our third corresponding part of the simile, which are the sutras requiring interpretation, which primarily and explicitly explain the various conventional truths. This would include rebirth and karma and meditation skills, developing concentration, the other perfections such as patience, generosity, and so on. Morality, all these various things are included in conventional truths that need to be taught as well because that's the method aspect of the path. Whereas the wisdom that is cultivated through the definitive sutras is the wisdom aspect. All right, we're going to go on to number 1 in just a moment. Let's go back to the commentary. So now we go on to verse 147 and 148. It says, because the wisdom Dharmakaya of realization is beyond this world, an example cannot be found in this world. Therefore, it is presented as similar to the body of the Tathagata, again, which Geshe Loden called a statue, but in the earlier part it was called the form, the Buddha form, the body of a Tathagata, and the basic element. So again, this first verse is essentially saying that wisdom, truth, body, the wisdom, Dharmakaya realization is something that is beyond our, you can't find an example of it in the world because it has transcended the world completely. It's a wisdom mind of a Buddha. What could we point to as an example of that? Well, in this case, we're just going to use the body of a Tathagata because that's the closest thing we can find. But you cannot find an example that is corresponding for it. Then that was the first one. We're going to get to the commentary on it in a minute. The second and the third are talked about in this next verse. The teaching of the sutras of definitive meaning in a subtle and deep way is like the singular taste of honey. I'll get to how this is explained. There's actually another presentation that talks about it being not just the object itself, the emptiness, being similar to honey, in that all phenomena have emptiness, and that emptiness is undifferentiable. All honey has sweetness, and that sweetness is undifferentiable in terms of the sweetness. Yes, different honeys taste different depending upon what flowers the bees cultivated the honey from and what have you. But nonetheless, they are similar in their sweetness. And this is how the initial part of the analogy is set out, is that emptiness is the same in regard to all phenomena. There's no differentiating the emptiness of one object from another. But nonetheless, there are different objects. In the same way, there's no differentiating the sweetness of honey from one to another. Nonetheless, there are, various honeys that are set out, all right? But it's kind of primarily the idea that honey is always sweet, emptiness is always the same nature. The second part of verse 148, the teaching of the sutras of interpretable meaning in multiple ways is similar to kernels hidden in their husks, the grain that is inside the husk. And the idea here that is corresponding is that just as you have many different conventional truths, many varied phenomena that the Buddha teaches, the vast, nonetheless, you also have many different grains that can grow within husks, right? You can have barley and wheat and rice and various other grains and so on. So you have kind of these two correspondences. Let's look at that section that goes into that in more detail. So the first one, the exalted wisdom. Let me just get to the right page and what I have in front of me so I make sure I look down at any notes that I have. The first one, the exalted wisdom Dharmakaya of realization is the ultimate supramundane phenomenon. And an illustration of it is not perceivable in the world because it's supramundane, right? It's beyond this world. Therefore, a statue in the form of a Tathagata is likened to the naturally pure basic element, the very nature of the Dharmakaya, isolated from all adventitious defilement and pervading all sentient beings. Because again, this is what a wisdom truth body of the Buddhas does. It pervades all beings. It knows the emptiness of all phenomena, and of course the aspect of it that knows conventionalities, which is not the primary one in this example, but nonetheless, it also knows all the varied phenomena that exist conventionally, the minds of those beings, their karma, their predispositions, how to benefit them, exactly what teachings will be of use. Okay, so that's the first one. That's how the correspondence is set out for that. Number two, when one experiences the meaning of the definitive sutras, which teach the ultimate truth, emptiness, or the way of the subtle and profound, it is an experience of the one taste nature of all dharmas, right? Because when you realize the emptiness of one phenomenon, you realize the emptiness of all phenomena. You haven't realized it with respect to that specific phenomenon because you haven't analyzed that phenomenon in regard to its emptiness, but it's the same emptiness, it's the same taste. Therefore, it is likened to the one taste sweetness of honey. The interpretable sutras, this is the third element, which teach the variety of conventional truths, are likened to the kernel or the grain found within the coverings of a variety of husks, right? The ones that cover wheat grains, the wheat husks, the barley husks, the amaranth husks. I mean, many different grains. I can't go through the whole litany of grains with you tonight because I don't know them for one thing. But all right, so we have those three being set out in kind of in terms of the correspondences, the varied things that are conventionalities being the grains, as to conclude that. So illustrating the teachings of conventional and ultimate truth with similes gives further explanation of the term pervasive in the line from verse 27, remember the one I showed you earlier, because the activities of the Dharmakaya are pervasive, because this shows how the wisdom truth body of the Buddhas are pervasive, because they pervade sentient beings in terms of that energy that is continually giving definitive teachings and interpretable teachings to sentient beings. Again, not that right now everyone's sitting here listening to a Buddha. I'm not saying that. What we're saying is that that force, that energy is there all the time. The Buddhas never cease it. They never like go to bed and say, okay, I'm going to turn off my Dharma light now and I'm not going to be shining the Dharma on sentient beings. They continually are sending that. It's pervading all beings every moment. It's just up to the individual karma as to whether we experience that. And it says there then, this third sentence, this is because the Dharmakaya pervades refers to being pervaded by enlightened activities. And enlightened activities engage with all sentient beings by way of the speech of the Tathagatas teaching the Dharma to various disciples. The capability of the enlightened activities to engage with sentient beings is always present. And this is the meaning of being pervaded by the Dharmakaya. All right? It's interesting. I'll share with you one thing that Geshe, or that not Geshe, Jampa Gendon. He was formerly a venerable. Jampa Gendon was an American monk who had disrobed by the time he was the teaching assistant at the master's program. He said in one teaching he had from His Holiness, he said that actually our faith, according to what His Holiness said, our faith is kind of like the antenna by which we can receive these radio-like waves of the enlightened activities of the Buddhas. It's kind of interesting, we don't talk about faith so much in Buddhism because it's faith that is generated in a slightly different way than perhaps faith in theistic traditions, where you have faith in something completely other than yourself that is this divine being or savior or whatever the case might be. The faith we generate in Buddhism is our own conviction in the teachings due to having practiced them and having seen the truth and the reality of them for ourselves. So in a way, it's kind of like we keep receiving teachings, and the more we generate deeper and deeper faith, the more we are subject to those guiding influences of the Buddhas. The more we can receive, the more stations we can get in, the clearer the signal gets, whatever you want to do in this analogy. So it's kind of, again, something to keep in mind. Is how what we want to be able to do for others is to pervade their minds, to be able to become that guiding influence. But we are also receiving it. Again, these concordant causes that produce the concordant effects. All right. Let's go to what Geshe Loden says on these. We still have a bit of time. Seems like the time's going by a little bit slower tonight for some reason, which is perfectly fine. I've got lots to go through. Okay, so number one, the Buddha statue or form. The ultimate wisdom directly perceiving the undefiled emptiness of the mind. Again, it's realizing the naturally abiding lineage, the suchness, is the truth body referred to as transcending the world or beyond the world. It is the basic element which is compared with the Tathagata statue or form. Again, I put in brackets. I probably should have even put in brackets there the wisdom truth body, because again, we're talking about that element of the Dharmakaya, not the nature truth body. The Yana Dharmakaya, not the Svabhavika Kaya. Then we have the next part. This comparison is made because there's no other conceivable example within the world that could suitably represent this transcendent element, the truth body. Because it is the ultimate transcendent wisdom, supramundane wisdom, the truth body is known to be beyond the world. So we can't find anything as an example of that that's gone completely beyond the world. So we're just going to use the form of a Tathagata or a Buddha statue, whatever you want to refer to represent it. The sphere of phenomena, the Dharma Dhatu, is pure by nature of all stains of true existence. In the state of enlightenment, there is also complete purity or absence of all temporary stains. An enlightened being never again arises from the state of directly perceiving the sphere of phenomena, the Dharma Dhatu, possessing these two kinds of purity. Again, the Buddha has the complete natural purity because nothing has ever been stained by inherent existence, and also has completed the adventitious purity because everything that obscures the mind, all the dirt in the mind, has been completely removed. This direct perception of an enlightened being is called the truth body of realization, or wisdom truth body. It is not directly accessible to those who are not enlightened. By the way, I've moved into a bit of commentary by Geshe Sonam Rinchen. There were a few passages in here, places in here where I thought it would be useful to share what he shares, because he again has some finer meaning sometimes to things. For this reason, because that's not manifest, or not in a way that can be accessed by sentient beings, for this reason, Buddhas manifest different form bodies, right? An enjoyment body for those bodhisattvas who are already exalted beings, and for others, an emanation body, which is the source of the scriptures. These form bodies are not as coarse as our own. An enlightened being, whoops, yes, this is fine, I think. Yeah, I'm going to the right slide. I thought for some reason that sounded familiar to what I read previously. An enlightened being never again arises from the state of directly perceiving the sphere of phenomena, possessing these two kinds of purity. Again, natural purity and adventitious purity. This direct perception of an enlightened being is called the truth body of realization, the wisdom truth body. Okay, so again, this is kind of showing, because how do sentient beings receive the guiding influence of the Buddhas? Through the scriptural Dharma, through the scripture that are definitive and the scriptures that are um, of a interpretable nature, that are provisional. Okay, let's go back to that and finish off the second and the third. Sorry, I didn't need to jump there, away from there. Number two, the sutras. This is the honey that is being referred to here. The sutras, which primarily and explicitly expound the ultimate truth, are likened to honey, because honey always has a single taste, the same in being sweet in nature. Similarly, there is no difference in the entity of the emptiness, which is the subject matter of these sutras, right? I already talked about that. Let's go to the next slide. This is from Geshe Sonam Rinchen. Again, he has a slightly different take on this. The great sage, the enlightened one, saw that this honey-like Buddha nature, the innately abiding disposition, is present in all living beings. And when freed from stains, it becomes the nature body of an enlightened being. For this reason, there are the wisdom truth body's teachings on emptiness, the ultimate. The scriptures are the effect which accords with the cause, again, the concordant cause, namely an enlightened one's direct perception of the reality of his or her mind. Okay, the scriptures accord with that because they bring about the state of that and then become the product of having attained that. These scriptures consist of both definitive sutras and discourses which explain the ultimate, and interpretable discourses which explain the conventional. When emptiness is perceived directly, it always produces bliss of the same taste, just as honey is always sweet. So it's kind of interesting. He uses this to even refer to the subjective experience being kind of similar, that it's always producing bliss of the same taste, meaning that every Buddha kind of has the same blissful awareness that is produced through realizing emptiness at the greatest degree. When you attain the full culmination of those teachings in terms of your wisdom truth body, being in meditative equipoise on emptiness for the remainder of existence, you essentially have attained the same blissful state as any other being who's a Buddha. There's no differentiation of the bliss there, just as honey is always sweet. So this isn't, again, one that we have in our text, but I think it's kind of interesting. You can point to the subjective experience also being similar to the objective thing that is known, the emptiness that is known, that again is of one taste with the emptiness of all phenomena. Number three, the grain, and this refers to, again, the provisional or interpretable meaning sutras. The sutras which primarily and explicitly expound the various conventionalities are likened to the variety of grains within husks, because they show the various methods to extract the benefit of the essence, perceiving emptiness, right? The reason why any provisional teachings are given is to get you to the ultimate, to the definitive meaning sutras, right? That's the goal. But you need those definitive, or those interpretable teachings, because otherwise you don't have the structure to do that. Imagine trying to study the Lam Rim if it was just the teachings on emptiness, if you didn't have any of the preceding teachings. You wouldn't even be able to develop the concentration that is essential for developing wisdom without conventional teachings. So we need them in order to perceive emptiness. All right, that gets us up through where we've studied so far. So again, there's this idea of the wisdom truth body, which is like the gold statue or the form body of a Buddha, this statue that is this essence that we cannot know, this wisdom truth body that is incapable of being known by sentient beings, and then the ways in which that manifests through the scriptural Dharma, this realization of the Buddhas giving us the interpretable and the definitive sutras so that we can achieve uh, the path to enlightenment through realizing emptiness. Everything is an aid to help us to realize emptiness. I think I can get through number 4. We just have one more, and then we'll see if there are any questions, and we'll go into our little breakout for the discussion. I don't know that I need to cover this. Yeah, I think I have skipped that. It goes and corresponds to things to scripture, and I don't think it's really so essential. Remember, this is the only one, the only simile is the 4th that corresponds to suchness, because suchness is of one taste. And so it's only going to be applying to the gold that is underneath the filth. And it's not the filth in this case, it was it's the filth, I'm sorry, the filth that is covering the gold. So as the nature is unchanging, virtuous, and of natural purity, so suchness is said to resemble a golden statue. So we have kind of this idea of being kind of 3 ways that we can talk about that suchness, that nature of the Buddha lineage, and how that resembles gold. So we have here, in terms of the commentary, its nature is 1, without change from good to bad, right? It is unchanging in its essence. Suchness is the same from moment to moment. It has no ability to change. And by virtue of that, we can say it fulfills to perfection all one's wishes, because by realizing that unchanging suchness, we can fulfill our wishes. So that's how it pertains to that next part. Secondly, it is without fault, meaning that it has, it says there, being without fault, it is good and virtuous. It has kind of a virtuous quality. Now, we can't say that suchness itself is virtuous, because it has no inherent virtue in it. It's a negation of inherent existence. But we often talk about emptiness being ultimate virtue. Ultimate virtue means it's the ultimate object realized by a virtuous mind. The most virtuous mind we can develop is a mind realizing emptiness directly. And the Buddha's mind that is realizing emptiness all the time is, of course, the most virtuous mind that can be the culmination of that path of virtue. So in this way, we call emptiness ultimate virtue, because it is the object that is known by a virtuous mind of the greatest degree. So that's the second quality that has a similarity in regard to this simile. So again, the first one that was that it's unchanging, just like gold is unchanging. The nature of gold doesn't change from moment to moment. Again, gold does have an impermanent quality. We're not saying it's completely free of any sort of change, but it has a similar type of consistency as suchness. Secondly, it is good and virtuous, because gold can be used to bring about happiness, right? We can use it as a means to relieve our poverty and so on. The third one says, with the defilements not part of its nature, in the verse that was where it's of natural purity. Gold does not have any sort of, can't be tarnished in a permanent way. Maybe the gold has some aging that happened to it, but you can polish that away. And the gold, the essence of it is pure. It doesn't have any sort of defilements within it. In the same way, our minds don't have any natural defilement. They have the adventitious defilements, but no natural defilement. So therefore, this suchness, Gyaltsab Je says, the natural emptiness of the mind is spoken of as being like a nugget of gold lying amid filth. And we had filth being described when we looked at the previous one as the regenerative fluids of human beings, that kind of waste that is impure and so on. This explains the ultimate truth, natural emptiness nature of the Tathagata, and the way it engages without the slightest difference in its appearance with the nature of the minds of all sentient beings. It was with this in mind that the statement, all sentient beings possess the Tathagata essence, was made. So again, it's alluding to the third line of that verse 27 there. But nonetheless, it's because sentient beings do have naturally abiding lineage, suchness with defilement, that we can then say they have developmental lineage. So we're going to get to that. That's the last of these three natures. This is the second nature, the suchness, again, that is of the same nature as the suchness of our own minds. It's undifferentiable. Let's look at how this is explained. I'm going to go forward just so you know where this goes in terms of we have another section that follows, and I'm going to actually skip over that. Well, I didn't skip over it in my notes, but let's leave that and I'll look at it before next week and see if we really need to cover it. That's the top of page 200. I do want to share what Geshe Loden, and I don't know if I have any passages from Geshe Sonam Rinchen in this, at least what Geshe Loden says on number 4. The gold, which again corresponds to suchness. Suchness is likened to gold because gold is immutable, it's unchanging. That's the first quality where you have a similarity. Its nature does not change. It can, however, change form and thus be made into various ornaments. And that again speaks to the sort of the value of it, the virtue of it, that we can transform through knowing emptiness, suchness, our minds into a virtuous state, all the way to the most virtuous state of buddhahood. Gold has a similar ability to be able to be transformed into various ornaments and figures, what have you. Whatever its form, though, the third characteristic, the nature of gold is never tarnished. So again, we have those three things. It's immutable or unchanging. We have that it is virtuous because it can bring about, through transformation into various objects and so on, a relief of our suffering into the state of the fullness of our being, the most virtuous state. And then finally, that it's never tarnished. It doesn't have any natural defilements. And that may be it for that. Oh no, there's a little bit more. Like that, the emptiness of the mind is unchanging by nature, while the wisdom perceiving it is transformable through the various bodhisattva grounds, right? The virtue can be increased and increased all the way to the most virtuous mind of a Buddha. Suchness remains virtuous throughout and perfectly pure by nature. Again, virtuous not in its having a nature of virtue, but in it being ultimate virtue, the object that is realized as the bodhisattva proceeds through the grounds. And it's perfectly pure by nature. It has no defilements that are there naturally. We have adventitious defilements with our suchness right now, but suchness itself is not defiled by any stains of inherent existence. The fourth obscured phenomenon is suchness. I did share this from Geshe Tenzin Temple, just reiterating in his words what these three are referring to. It is illustrated by gold, which has three main aspects. It does not change into anything else, but always remains gold. It's an unchanging, immutable nature. It can be used as a base metal for making ornaments. Again, speaking to it's a base where we can realize it that is capable then of transforming into great virtue. And it never tarnishes. In a similar way, the suchness within the minds of all sentient beings, first, never changes. Secondly, it's a basis for developing all good qualities. And third, it is not tarnished by the contaminations of the afflictions. Because suchness is not defiled in kind of its nature as it is. All right. A lot of words tonight, but some pretty kind of interesting concepts that we're working with here. And I like how this text then takes those three natures that we looked at so long ago, right? Way back in verse 27, we were introduced to them. And then as well, when we started the 10 presentations, we were looking at those and understanding them. Well, that's how we're going to talk about these 9 similes. What is obscured? It's the Buddha nature, but it has 3 kind of components that again are very important to remember as terms of understanding how our Buddha nature is influenced by the pervasive activities of the Buddhas. It also has a suchness, an emptiness that is indifferentiable from the suchness of the minds of the Buddhas. And then also we have the developmental lineage that can go through this process of transformation because of the emptiness of the mind, the naturally abiding lineage. So we have a few questions that you can work with in your discussion. Let me put those on the screen. I realize I did get these out late. I warned you all last week that you might get them late. I think Venerable Dundrup got these out on the internet, but if you didn't, were they out there? They were out there? Oh, good. This is from the previous one. Since we did cover a little bit of that, if you want to go over numbers 8 and 9, you're welcome to do that. The ways that the similes of the obscurations for each of the 9 correspond to. Again, we would primarily focus on 8 and 9 because I taught 1 through 7 the last week. And why are they corresponding with that which obscures in the similes? And then in regard to the full explanation of the 9 similes in terms of the meaning of that which is obscured, how are they grouped according to the 3 characteristics of the nature of the basic element that were described in the presentation of nature among the 10 presentations? And then moreover, for the ones that we have covered tonight, which are the first 4, what are the individual meanings for each of the 9 obscured objects? What are the ways that the similes of the obscured for each of the 9 correspond to or are similar to their respective meanings? All right. Pretty basic. Okay. All right. So we'll need to have the microphone turned off over there, or the sound turned off, so those folks in the Zoom room can do their discussion without it being broadcast here. And then the folks in the room here can begin their discussion. Let's take about 20 minutes. So at about 5 minutes to, we'll come back. Were there any questions before we do this? Sorry, any questions? No? Okay, well then discuss and we'll see what questions are. Oh, Phyllis does.
I have a question about the transmission of information that's not verbalized, that happens when we're in the presence of the objects that are filled with,
that I have wisdom mind.
And the people who are teaching, that maybe
Yeah.
there is a wisdom that comes through them that's not verbalized, but you can see.
I mean, when we say speech of the Buddhas, I guess again we are mainly talking about when there is an utterance of words, but the Buddha himself even taught without words at times.
Okay.
I mean, there's like the flower ornament sutra, I think it's called, where he simply held up a flower. And it said that at that time, there were realizations of emptiness simply by virtue of what he transmitted through holding a flower. So I would say that that would still be included in any of the transmissions, if you will. Maybe that's a better word to use than teachings or,
Right,
you know,
transmissions.
yeah,
Not verbalized.
right.
That we have the possibility of
Right.
receiving, right?
Right. Because even what happens in tantric initiations, for example, if you are finally in tune with the guru who is doing all of this, is that you're actually able to receive a transmission from that guru. If everything kind of lining up in a way to where your mind is very ripe, and of course that being is doing their thing, then you can actually receive sort of things that are not necessarily verbal, that are going to help to ripen the 4 kayas in our own continuum. So it's not purely verbal. Yeah, good question. Yeah, thanks, Phyllis. Okay, please proceed again for about 20 minutes. So were there any questions from the discussion or anything else from tonight? Sean, anyone here in the Gompa? I like this section a lot. I don't know if that's coming through and how I'm teaching tonight, but I think it's kind of nice. I mean, the other one where you have these different layers of obscuration, it's kind of technical and knowing this and that, but it's not really seeming as relevant as what this section is in terms of, at least for me, these teachings become a little more impactful as we do start seeing what we're meant to be seeing through this course, which is our own Buddha potential and these various aspects of it. And I like those 3 kind of natures or elements of the nature that interact, that all create the possibility for us to become enlightened. So, anything from anyone? All right. Well, we don't have to stay any longer than the allotted time. It's just about 9 o'clock here, so I think we'll just wrap it up then. So what I would encourage you to do, again, you've been given some questions, these that we just work with, to you mull over for the next week. And then, again, as far as we went, and then also a meditation on that which is obscured. And again, I referenced all of the 9, but we'll use that meditation again probably next week. But you can just use the ones that we've worked with if you want to meditate on those. And let's just go to the prayers. Okay. Oops, how did I get back? Oh, there we go. Okay, due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Might mention, I don't know if this was this class, I think it was the other class I was teaching online from my mom's, that this phrase, may the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta, Rinpoche occasionally would also interject or create, may the wisdom realizing emptiness, Tongpanyi, may the tantric realizations, whatever realizations we want, we can make that aspiration, that whatever has arisen, whatever we have developed in terms of any realization, as we were talking about now, we want to eventually have that full realization, the wisdom truth body. So may that which has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has already been cultivated not diminish in the least, but instead increase more and more. So we're going to just recite this with bodhicitta, but you can think about this in terms of all the various realizations, all the topics of the Buddha, both the definitive meaning, ultimate truth, emptiness, as well as the conventional truths such as bodhicitta, patience, whatever. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. We do the prayers for our precious teachers, beginning with His Holiness, where we, again, are just going to recite this single prayer that encapsulates our strong intentions for all of our spiritual guides that are with us still, to have good health and long lives, and to have all their holy wishes be fulfilled immediately. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then, due to us being in this condition of not having Lama Zopa Rinpoche's holy mind manifesting in a physical form for us, we want to make strong prayers that that happen as soon as possible. And if it has happened, that all the conditions continue to be in place for Rinpoche to manifest in a way to benefit us and other beings in this world. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Lastly, we dedicate for any beings that we're holding in our heart at this time, those beings who we are close to, as well as those who we know of in the world who are experiencing great strife and suffering. So take a moment just to bring those beings to mind that you are holding in your heart. And feeling the compassion for them, feeling the desire for them to find true peace and happiness. Give away all this positive energy, all the merit that you've created tonight. We give this en masse to these beings so they can be free from their suffering immediately, and also have all the causes and conditions that will help them on their path of complete awakening. And may all beings have these same results through what we have done here tonight. Okay, thank you all for joining. I might just put in a little pitch. I've been invited to teach the Discovering Buddhism module on emptiness, which is a topic that we've been talking about here. If you want a more beginning kind of approach, in terms of beginning, emptiness is not a beginning topic, but nonetheless, I'll be giving that instruction on Monday nights, starting next Monday for 6 Mondays consecutively. And that'll be here physically as well as on Zoom. And so if you're interested in that, I just wanted people to know about that. But there are many other wonderful offerings that are happening with Geshe Tashi Dondup, who is a visiting Geshe, who Geshe-la knows, Geshe Sherab knows. So I might mention, while I brought this in with me, and at some point I may share more, but I just haven't had a chance to read it. But the latest issue of Buddha Dharma magazine is about Buddha nature. So there are some interesting things in here. Of course, different takes by different traditions, but I haven't read all of it, and it's quite interesting, talking about the importance of this subject and how it often isn't really taught so much. And so you can gain some appreciation perhaps for this course by reading a bit of Buddha Dharma as well. But I thought I'd mention it. It's the fall 2023 issue, and you might find it still on bookshelves and what have you. But I think the winter issue will be out sometime soon. I keep meaning to bring it in with me and mention it. I just haven't done that. So, all right, everyone, have a good week. I'll see you next Thursday for 21. We're getting to 24 quickly. All right, be well.